All right. When did you discover this hole?
Well, the hole has always been there. We've been out there for a couple of years now, and the hole has been there since we've been there. It's been there since the previous owner was there, and the previous owner there was quite elderly, and I'd say he was there for a good 30, 40 years before we moved in.
Wow.
In 1997, Art Bell, the host of the popular late-night radio talk show Coast to Coast AM, received a fax from a man named Mel Waters. In the fax, Mel explained that he had what appeared to be a bottomless pit on his property near Manistash, Washington. Shortly after, Art invited Mel to his radio show, where he shared the story of Mel's hole with the world. Little did anyone know that it was going to be the biggest mystery in human history. What is the truth of Mel's hole? Was it a portal to another dimension, a secret military mission, or just a hoax? During the interview, Mel revealed that he had purchased the property a few years earlier, and the previous owners had held it for over 30 years. The neighbors were familiar with the pit and would often dispose of their trash in it, but the pit never seemed to fill up. It was a circular pit with a stone retaining wall extending about 15 feet below the ground surface. Beyond the wall, the hole bored through dirt and bedrock, leading to darkness that seemed endless. Nobody could remember when the hole wasn't there, and there was no apparent indication of a bottom. Anything dropped into the pit produced no sound, no splash, no crash, just silence. Sounds from the top didn't echo back either. There were other peculiarities. Animals, including Mel's dogs, were afraid of the hole. While his dogs were typically loyal and obedient, they refused to approach the pit. If he tried to lead them near it, they resisted vigorously. This fear of the hole wasn't limited to Mel's pets. No one's animals would go near it. Mel shared a story from a neighbor who claimed that he had disposed of his deceased hunting dog into the pit. Strangely, he later spotted the same dog with the same appearance running through the woods as if it were chasing something. Over time, Mel's curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to conduct some experiments. Drawing from his experience as a former shark fisherman, he believed he could determine if there was water in the pit by extending a fishing line deep enough. He threaded the end of his line through a roll of Lifesaver candy and lowered it into the pit. The candy hung 2,500 feet down for a while, but when he pulled it back up, it remained intact. There was no water at 2,500 feet. For his next experiment, Mel lowered a 1-pound lead weight into the pit. When he reached the end of his fishing line, he attached a new spool of line and continued. He repeated this process, extending the line until he had used a staggering 80,000 feet of fishing line, equivalent to over 15 miles. Art's listeners found this intriguing, but remained mostly skeptical. They called in with suggestions, such as the possibility that the line had already reached the bottom and remained taut due to its weight. Others argued that, based on physics, the line should have snapped if it hadn't hit the bottom by now, given the total weight of the extended line. Some proposed weighing the used line and dividing it by the weight of a single foot of line. Another suggested using radar to measure the true depth of the pit. There was even a rather unsettling suggestion to throw a live cat down the pit to listen for its cries, a suggestion Art didn't favor. Art had a few suggestions of his own. He proposed finding a volunteer to be lowered into the pit to provide a first-hand account of what lay below. Mel had concerns about potential dangers deeper in the pit, such as high temperatures, extreme air pressures, and toxic gases. Despite these concerns, a caller eagerly volunteered for the task, although no concrete plans were made to proceed with it. Mel himself admitted that he wouldn't want to be lowered into the pit due to the risk of the rope breaking. Art then asked Mel if he'd consider jumping into the pit if he had a terminal illness, to which Mel replied affirmatively. He even mentioned that his will specified his body should be disposed of in the pit. Art also floated the idea of allowing the government to deposit radioactive waste into the pit for a fee, assuming it was indeed bottomless. During the show, Mel mentioned he had dropped more than one television vacuum tube into the pit, hoping to hear it implode. Art cautioned him, suggesting that admitting this could lead to trouble for polluting the groundwater. Mel assured him that despite years of waste disposal, the water in the area remained uncontaminated. This peculiar episode provided entertainment for the night and quickly concluded. However, it wasn't the last time Coast to Coast AM listeners would hear from Mel Waters and his infamous hole. Mel ventured to Ellensburg in search of someone who might have bought a matching belt buckle from him years earlier, and he found a match. While examining these coins, Mel noticed something unusual about a dime. It was minted in 1943, but there were no dimes with Roosevelt's face on them in that year. Additionally, American coins bear a letter indicating the city where they were minted, and this dime was marked with a B, despite no U.S. city starting with that letter having ever minted currency. The buckle owner took the coin to a coin dealer, who couldn't explain it but offered a substantial sum to buy it. The man wanted some time to consider the offer, but a few days later, the Treasury Department confiscated the coin from him. Richard C. Hoagland, a hyperdimensional physics theorist, later speculated that the coins might have originated from a parallel universe. Mel's former wife has vanished without a trace, and Mel has lost touch with what his former property looks like now, or who's taking care of it. Around the 16-minute mark of the 2002 audio file number 2, skepticism began to rise among many as Mel's story seemed increasingly fantastic. But then he dropped a bombshell on Art by asking about the Terra server. The Terra server is a database of public domain aerial and satellite imagery, which became available online in December 1997, 8 months after Mel Waters first appeared on the radio. In 2002, before the advent of Google Earth, Mel shared live on air that, according to his nephew, his former property had been removed or erased from public domain imagery. After a commercial break, Art's listeners found a satellite image that suggested Mel's story might not be as imaginary as it initially seemed. Art also testified that after a previous interview, a TV camera crew visited the Ellensburg area and observed evidence indicating military presence. Mel added another puzzle piece, mentioning that people at a nearby truck stop claimed to have seen a black beam, best described as anti-light, periodically shooting up into the sky from the location of the hole. Mel had some intriguing stories to share about his experiences. One of his trucker friends recalled delivering a substantial amount of fiber optic equipment to a warehouse in Ellensburg, where a group of Israelis received it. Another trucker claimed to have transported large crated instruments from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in San Francisco, California, to the same warehouse. It's worth noting that LLNL works on projects for the U.S. military, and San Francisco is where Mel ended up after his reported abduction. While Mel wasn't certain if these events were connected, he felt it was worth reporting, just in case. During this part of the show, a fan posed an interesting question to Art. What are the odds of a single person finding 2 bottomless pits in one lifetime? The odds seemed too low to calculate, but Mel claimed to have found a second one. Here's how it happened. Coast to Coast AM enjoyed significant popularity, particularly in the western United States, known for its vast stretches of unused public land and Native American reservations. Given the show's subject matter, many people with a deep interest in strange phenomena similar to Mel were regular listeners. In a twist of fate, a group of Native Americans in Nevada heard Mel on the show and reached out to him via email. They invited him to their reservation to discuss his knowledge of arts, crafts, and wild plants. In early September 2001, Mel traveled to Nevada to meet these individuals who had expertise in plant-based natural medicine and were intrigued by his research. Mel mentioned that the plants he grew near the original hole were particularly effective. He described these plants, and the Native Americans took him to another area of land where they had their own hole. This second hole was situated in the middle of a village on public land, where Basque families had settled. The Basque people are a relatively small and isolated ethnic group, originating from a specific European region. These particular Basques had been raising sheep in Nevada since the 1800s. They regarded the pit as a spiritual focal point. This hole, like Mel's, was approximately 9 feet wide, but it had a metal collar around it instead of a stone retaining wall, and this metal lining extended as far as the eye could see. The metal rim emitted a unique field of warmth, different from ordinary heat. Similar to Mel's hole, this new pit exhibited unusual sound-canceling properties. It absorbed all sounds made directly above it, and striking the metal rim produced no sound. Animals were also afraid of this hole, and sightings of a black beam emanating from it were reported, much like what some had witnessed around Mel's hole in Washington. Mel and the villagers decided to conduct experiments. Their initial attempt involved lowering a bucket of store-bought ice into the pit as far as possible, which was about 1,500 feet. Simultaneously, they kept another bucket of ice on the surface as a control and waited for it to melt halfway. Then, they raised the pit ice to compare the two. Remarkably, the ice in the pit did not melt. Instead, it remained lukewarm. Even more peculiar, it stayed solid when held in Mel's hands. In an effort to melt it, they attempted to cook it over a fire pit, but instead of melting, the lukewarm ice caught fire. It produced a heat-generating flame, although not a typical large yellow flame. It was more like a flickering light. Mel noted that the bucket of ice continued to burn for months, and he believed it might still be burning as he shared the story on the air. One individual even took some of the burning ice home and used it to heat his cabin during the winter. They conducted a repeat of the bucket experiment, but the results were inconsistent, working only about 1/3 of the time. They encountered mixed outcomes. During one attempt, one of the Basques expressed a desire to be lowered into the hole personally. However, they dissuaded him due to the peculiar results of the ice. Instead, they decided to lower a sheep into the pit. The sheep strongly resisted the idea, kicking, screaming, and panicking like all animals, refusing to go near the hole. Its resistance disrupted their plan as it valiantly fought against their efforts. Determined, the Basques stunned the sheep between the eyes and placed it inside a crate with a cable attached for lowering, which they brought over to the hole. As they approached the hole, the sheep regained consciousness and went into a frenzy inside the crate, fully aware of what awaited it. The sheep emitted distressing screams that would give anyone chills. However, once the crate with the lamb was positioned directly over the pit, all noise ceased. The lamb continued to shake the box vigorously, but over the hole, there was complete silence. As the sheep descended inside the crate, it struggled, but by the halfway point on the cable's length, any further movement became imperceptible. At the end of the 1,500-foot line, Mel and the villagers felt an odd and fuzzy vibration in the metal rim. They left the sheep below for half an hour before beginning to raise it back to the surface. However, the box no longer showed signs of movement. From the outside, everything appeared fine, but inside, the sheep had died. It still looked normal externally, prompting a Basque elder to dissect the animal on a nearby table. Inside, it was as though the sheep had been cooked. The villager noticed an unusual gel surrounding a massive tumorous growth within the sheep. They removed the tumor, which seemed to pulse like a fleshy sac. Upon cutting it open, a fleshy creature emerged resembling an 18-inch hybrid between a fetus and a seal, complete with flippers, but with human-like eyes. Astonishingly, this creature was alive and connected to the tumor by an umbilical cord. It gazed at its human observer with what appeared to be reverence detached itself from the cord, and conveyed a sense of miraculous presence to Mel. One of the Basques suggested killing the creature, but they decided against it. Instead, the creature crawled to the edge of the table and looked at Mel in a way that seemed to establish a connection, and Mel felt compelled to place it on the ground. The creature then gave Mel a slow nod, turned around, and voluntarily returned to the hole. The witnesses were deeply moved and emotionally drained by this extraordinary experience. Ultimately, they chose to dispose of the remains of the sheep back into the hole. Mel claimed that he had been diagnosed with a terminal form of esophageal cancer in late August before his trip to Nevada, with doctors giving him only 6 months to live. However, upon returning home from Nevada, his cancer had miraculously vanished. Mel believed that the creature encountered in Nevada had somehow healed him before departing. Mel shared that a Basque elder had always viewed the hole as something spiritual. This elder didn't seem surprised by the creature's story. Before retiring for the night, he placed an object in Mel's hand and instructed him to keep it. Mel compiled without inspecting the item. Later, when he reached into his pocket, he found something the old man had discovered in the area, enclosed in a small red envelope, a 1943 Roosevelt dime. In December 2002, returned to Coast AM with intriguing updates. Helicopters had been frequently flying over the village with the hole. Mel had learned that the metallic collar surrounding the new hole became invisible beyond a certain distance. Astonishingly, the mysterious 1943 dime would vanish from sight at around 15 feet away and wouldn't appear on film or digital scanners. Also shared more about the enigmatic burning ice. A Basque man who used a can of ever-burning ice as a heat source in his wood stove noticed unusual effects. He experienced persistent thirst, dry air, and skin dryness in his home. While trying to humidify the air with a kettle of water on the stove, He observed steam seemingly lingering around the stove and being absorbed by it. One day, the man returned home to discover that his stove had crashed through the hearth and floorboards, sinking about a foot into the ground beneath. Facing frigid conditions, he repaired the stovepipe and continued using the stove, now positioned below the floor, to heat his home. A week or two later, he found his cabin had disintegrated into piles of dry wood dust. He left the remains behind and moved in with his brothers. A month later, upon returning, he found the stove had sunk 5 feet into the ground, leaving a smooth, glassy surface in the hole it created. The man contacted Mel and shared this unusual tale. Mel decided to contact one of the mysterious officials who had been in contact with him when he was in Australia. This official seemed deeply concerned and urgently requested Mel to provide the cabin's location and directions. The cabin owner cooperated and led them to the site. He then chose to hide in the nearby hills. Observing the response to the sinking stove, a team was dispatched to address the situation, and it wasn't clear whether they were military or scientists. They brought substantial construction equipment to the site, including cranes. However, even with multiple cranes, they struggled to lift the stove. Eventually, they inserted chains into the ground and poured water over them with the help of multiple cranes. This allowed them to hoist the stove out of the ground and load it onto an enormous truck. They then drove it away. Mel drew a connection between this strange ice and Kurt Vonnegut's fictional concept of Ice 9 from the novel Cat's Cradle. Ice 9 was a theoretical substance that could freeze all of Earth's water and potentially turn people into statues. Mel was under the impression that he was being followed, making him hesitant to return to the hole for fear that someone might find it through him. The Basques informed Mel that the creature that emerged from the dead sheep had returned multiple times since its initial appearance. They claimed to have established a means of communication with it, as it communicated with them through one of their boom boxes. However, when they attempted to record the dialogue, all that appeared on the tape were random, pulsating tones. Mel speculated that the creature might be a rock flyer, a legendary creature in Native American folklore that resides underground and can traverse between multiple Earths. This creature warned the Basques about the dangers of the burning ice, stating that it could rapidly destroy Earth if misused. They anticipated that greed and recklessness in its use might prevail in this world. The creature mentioned that intelligent beings from other worlds expected humanity to destroy itself through nuclear conflict, and they planned to utilize the ice on this planet once humans were gone. According to Mel, the discovery of burning ice in the universe often led to its improper use. With that, the interview concluded, and there have been no further updates from Mel Waters since. Mel's disappearance from public view left numerous unanswered questions and intriguing mysteries. His encounters with bottomless pits, strange creatures, and the enigmatic burning ice had captured the interest of many listeners, sparking debates and discussions in online forums and communities. Over time, the legend of Mel Waters and his extraordinary experiences only gained more attention. Coast to Coast AM, where Mel initially shared his extraordinary tales, continued to receive inquiries and messages from curious individuals seeking updates or any information about Mel's whereabouts. Despite their attempts to contact him, Mel appeared to have disappeared without a trace. As the years passed, more people shared their own stories and speculations related to Mel's hole and the unusual phenomena linked to it. Some claim to have encountered similar bottomless pits or anomalies in different parts of the world, further fueling interest in this phenomenon. These accounts ranged from remote locations in the United States to far-flung corners of the globe, adding to the mystery surrounding the concept of bottomless pits. Scientific communities and researchers were also intrigued by the concept of burning ice, which challenged conventional understanding. The potential implications of this peculiar substance extended beyond Mel's experiences, raising questions about its origins, properties, and possible applications or hazards. The story of Mel Waters and his encounters had not faded into obscurity, but had become a fixture in discussions of paranormal and unexplained phenomena. It continued to inspire amateur investigators, writers, and filmmakers, drawn to the enigmatic events tied to Mel and his interactions with the bottomless pits. Speculation and theories about Mel's disappearance varied widely. Some believed he had been silenced or coerced into secrecy by government agencies or powerful organizations, intent on controlling knowledge of the holes and their implications. Others suggested that Mel had chosen to step away from the public eye to protect himself and those close to him from potential risks associated with his discoveries. Meanwhile, the Basques' claim of communication with the creature from the hole via their boombox remained a topic of fascination and debate. Some questioned whether this communication shed light on the creature's origin or purpose, while others viewed it as a significant development in ongoing explorations of the phenomenon. In the absence of concrete updates from Mel himself, the legend of Mel's Hole took on a life of its own, inspiring creative works of fiction, documentaries, and even urban legends. The enduring appeal of the story lay in its ability to blend elements of the unexplained with human curiosity, encouraging individuals to contemplate the boundaries of scientific understanding and the mysteries that may still lie concealed beneath the Earth's surface.